Well, hello to you all. I am so pumped to do this and I am so appreciative of all of you here listening. Welcome to the first episode of Sabbatical Stories. I'm Bex Thomas, your host, and I set up the podcast to inspire courage and normalise taking a break from your career. I'm super excited to kick off Sabbatical Stories with the queen of career breaks, the one and only Katrina McGhee. Katrina's mission is to encourage people to learn how to live in a more sustainable way and live a life that they love. Her journey started with a 20-month career break, which led her to becoming one of the world's first career break and sabbatical coaches. I was so keen to have Katrina on the first episode because I wanted an anchor for you all, and her book, Taking a Career Break for Dummies, is one that I recommend to everybody thinking about or embarking on a sabbatical or career break. It's a book that I reference moving forward, and so this is a perfect introduction. In this episode, we concentrate on Katrina's personal story, one laced with all of the emotions from pain to guilt to pride to happiness. We talk about limiting beliefs and how to overcome them, unpacking what success means, what drives us to making change, what to do if your biggest fear comes true post a break, and how to get the best from your career break, and way, way more.
Deep down, you've tried, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, it's all for you.
Hi Katrina, and welcome to Sabbatical Stories. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate you.
Oh my gosh, Bex, I'm so excited to be here and kick this thing off.
Thank you for being my first ever guest.
Oh my gosh, it's such an honor. I was so excited when you asked me to join you. So I've been looking forward to this for several weeks. I'm like, oh my gosh, is it time? Is it time?
So, as it's exactly that, your story, could you please give us an introduction to Katrina and who you are and an intro to your sabbatical story?
Absolutely. I see in the world today a really unsustainable pace that the majority of us are living and working at. And so the work I do and who I am and the mission that I'm on is I'm here to help high achievers, especially because high achievers love to strive and push through and hit that place of burnout. But honestly, I think so many of us can relate to that. But I'm here to help us find a way to access more freedom and fulfillment through taking breaks. So I am a career break and sabbatical coach. I've been doing this for 7 years. And the work that I do was really born of my own journey and my own story. But the work I do matters so much because I want people to enjoy their life, but also learn how to live in a more sustainable way and rethink how work and life integrate into each other. Because I don't think the way that we've approached work is it's no longer sustainable. So for me, my journey all started with a 20-month career break that I took in 2013. At the time, there was not social media like all the hashtags where you could search for, information or go down YouTube rabbit holes. Like it was literally me Googling the crap out of travel bloggers and reading their stories. And while they weren't taking necessarily full on career breaks, because a lot of them were trying to make an income while they were traveling. So they were more of a digital, like a precursor to the digital nomad or a digital nomad at that time. It was really inspiring to hear about how they left their jobs and how they saved up to travel. And that was like so aligned with what I was trying to do in my break that eventually led to the job that I do today and as we'll talk about, the book I wrote, and also just being able to say that I've helped almost 100 people take career breaks and sabbaticals, which I feel very proud of that number.
So you should. Incredible. And so 2 questions off the back of that come to mind straight away. First of all, what triggered or prompted the dream?
I've reflected on this obviously like many times. And I have to say, the more I've talked about it over the years, the more clear it's become to me that it was multiple seeds, baby, tiny, tiny seeds being planted over time. But I do know that one of the biggest seeds, there were 2 really big seeds that got planted for me that created this dream. The first one was I was a newly minted like undergraduate. I was coming out of my 4-year degree and I was working in Atlanta and I had the radio on and I was probably only like a year into even less into my new job, my first job. I'm like 21 years old, feeling like such a big deal. And I remember the host, it was a very popular show in Atlanta, and the host had his friend come on, and I think she was a police officer maybe, but she was leaving her career and she was making this plan and saving this money, and she was going to quit her job and go somewhere in Central America and just wander. And she didn't even really know where. She just knew she was going to take 3 to 6 months off and just see what happened. And I remember thinking, even though I was just starting my career, I remember thinking, I aspire to have that level of freedom. And I wish I could be a person that just went on a completely hard left turn my own path and just did whatever the hell I wanted to do. I'm so jealous of her, but also I'm envious of like the freedom that she's creating for herself. Seed number one, right? Seed number two, this was like probably 2002. Seed number two was 2009 when I read Eat, Pray, Love in between my 2 years in business school. And again, right, like talk about being in this very sort of like early stage where taking a break was not, it's not very reasonable. First time I was just starting my career, and the second time I'm in between 2 years of business school. Like, what am I even quitting at that point? But I just remember feeling like, wait, I can do this. I can be an adult who quits their job just because I want to like do something else and see the world. And I'm not going to be a pariah, or it's not like the most irresponsible thing a person's ever done. It just gave me so much permission to revisit the dream that had been planted within me 7 years prior. And so I think there were many other tiny seeds, but these were two big moments. And as I just started to move forward in my life, it just became more and more true that that was what I wanted. And so 2 years after the Eat, Pray, Love seed was planted, I was sitting on my life coach's couch in the middle of this crisis, this existential crisis of thinking, I've had one career as an actuary, didn't like that, went back, got my MBA full time, crushed it at business school, but like came into my second career. Now I'm a market researcher. And guess what? I'm even more unhappy. Like, what the hell do I have to do to find some peace here and to find some happiness? What the heck do I want to do with my life? And I had no answers, but a lot of questions. So I hired this life coach, and it took several months of working with her to just shed all these layers and limiting beliefs and thoughts about who I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing and what money means to me in my life. And once I let go of enough layers, I just had this epiphany on her couch that was like a voice inside of me said, you don't want another career. You want a break. You need a break. And I was like, oh my God. And I think it just was the right time. And I had the right kind of support at that stage of my life to honor that truth instead of continuing to push it down and try to hide it away because it was very uncomfortable and scary to own.
And so once you'd owned the fact that that's what you needed, a break, was travel always the obvious part, that you were going to explore? Or how did you then think about what that break was going to look like?
Yeah, travel was always a part of it for sure. I had wanderlust even as a small child. Like I grew up in rural West Virginia in the United States. Like there was so much of the world I didn't have the chance to see growing up. So I think from a very young age, like very young, I had always like wanted to be a traveler, but I just wasn't. I didn't get a passport until I was 26, and I didn't actually use it until I was almost 30 years old. That was like the first time,
Wow.
I traveled abroad, and it was in business school. And so all that to say, there were just a lot of layers, but travel was always at the forefront. And I really believe, and I see this with my clients as well, you're either going to make a big scary change because you desire something so intensely that you just can't know life without going for it, or because you are in so much pain that
Mm.
finally you hit this breaking point where the pain of staying in the same situation becomes greater than the pain and fear of leaving. And I think for me, what travel was is that desire, right? It was the thing that was so desirable that it helped shift me out of that change. Now, I did have pain too, right? Feeling like I'm stuck in this career. It's a second career. I don't know what I want to do with my life. Like there was pain, but I don't think it was so great at that point. It was truly this desire to see the world. Like, when am I going to see the world if I don't make time to do it now? That said, once I decided to take a break, I knew travel was like the shining star of the story, but it wasn't the only important ingredient, right? Like, apples can be the hero of the apple pie, but like you need the cinnamon and you need the sugar and you need the crust. And so for me, those other ingredients that were still really important were quality time with my friends and family, because I felt like I had neglected that part of my life in my corporate rat race, partly because I just didn't have enough time off to go see them all and spend time with them the way I wanted to. I also wanted time to reflect on my life and figure out what could my next career move look like if I'm really unhappy now, and who am I now, and can I find some hobbies for a change and have some interest again, because I lost all that, along the way. And so those were other important pieces, but travel was like the shining star that led me to want to do this and to give me like such burning desire that I was willing to take this risk. But then once I knew I was taking a break, I sat back and said, okay, what is this really about? What would a successful break look like for me? Which is what, I help my clients do now too, is like really think about that ahead of time. And those other ingredients that I was just talking about were definitely pieces of it. So my break had different seasons and stages. They had different themes that like I faced into and out of over those 20 months.
And of course, the travel was certainly part of both the seeds you mentioned. So it makes
Yes.
sense then, of course, that it becomes the shining star, but there's all those other ingredients as well. You
Mhm.
mentioned limiting beliefs. What were some of those limiting beliefs? And aside from the life coach, how did you get over those?
Yeah. I mean, I do credit my life coach with a lot of it because we did this work before I had sort of this like epiphany, like, oh shit, I'm taking a break. Like I'm really taking a break. Um, but what I can say is that the limiting beliefs around money were huge, right? Like the limiting beliefs around being a responsible child and being a good daughter were enormous as well. And it's not even like somebody gave me these, they're things you absorb,
Mm,
right? I was the oldest child between my two parents and wanting to set a good example. And just, I was a smart kid receiving positive reinforcement from like, age 3 when I was like in my first like preschool experience and like getting things right and doing what you're supposed to do. It was just a really good feeling, right? So you sort of you give a smart kid like like they hit the bell and they get the reward and it's like, oh my gosh, I should do more of this. And so I was always looking to be a good kid and to be a good representative of like what my parents had created and what I was going to create in the world. And I think I just got really wrapped up in what success was. So what we had to unpack was what does it mean to be responsible? And what does it mean to be successful? And does the version of success that my brain had offered, does it fit who I am now? Does it fit who I am today? But again, that money piece too. What are my real values around money? How much money do I really need? And like what is making me happy versus what isn't? Because I think the automatic default, if we're not being conscious and aware, is that more money and more air quotes career success automatically equals happiness. And they're actually not related. Like there's a point where you do need to cover your expenses to live, right? And to have like things that you need to like be alive and be
mm.
healthy. But once you hit this threshold, making more money does not equal happiness. Having more success in your career does not equal more happiness. Like that's a whole separate thing that you have to work on. And you can create it separate of what your career is doing or how much money you're making once your basic needs are covered. But I didn't know that. And so I had to really like re-examine that and decide what a better belief was that gave me more permission to live a life that I wanted to live and to feel good about it.
It's redefining all of those beliefs to then give yourself permission to go out and do your own version.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I worked the 6W framework. So I always look at why we want to take a break, where we want to take a break, when is the right time, with who, what do you want to be doing on your break, and then who do you want to become? And I think that whole thing around, as you say, the where, the ingredients, there's so much that kind of incorporates into success, and then what success looks like for you out of a break. So what did success look like for you out of a break at that point?
Yeah. So actually, that's an interesting question because going into the break, if you were to ask me, what is my deepest hope? Like what would success look like? That was a big question, right? What would success be? And it had nuances and different aspects. But if you were to ask me, like, what's your biggest hope, right? Like, what's your biggest fear and what's your biggest hope? Like, what are the two opposites of that spectrum? My biggest fear was that I was going to have to go back to corporate. And I was like, oh gosh, please let me find something on this break that speaks to my soul so that I can get out of this corporate rat race and go find my happiness and make money somewhere else, some other way. And what happened when I came out of the break is that I had traveled for 20 months until I spent all my money very willingly, right? I originally planned 12 months and I decided to keep going because I was like, I don't want this to end and I'm just going to go until I'm broke. But then, I have very, very little money in my account. And I realized that before I could make a change, because I didn't have this epiphany on my break of like, this is the one thing I want to do forever and ever. And this is my calling in life, because I didn't have that kind of big moment, right? This firework moment, I was like, okay, well, I think I maybe want to try my own thing just because I really want to feel free. I want to have autonomy that I can't have with an employer. And I just want to stop pretending that I care about things I don't care about. But I don't know what that will be. I don't know if I could do it. The only way I know that I'll feel comfortable trying is if I'm debt free. Because if I have the burden of these student loan debts hanging over me and I owe $700+ a month to like the student loan, the student loan people, I'm never going to give myself the chance to fly. So then I was like, well, the way I know how to get out of debt is to go back to corporate because that's how I know how to make money fast. And I'll go do that. Okay. And then I'll just save as fast as I can. And I'll try to pay off this last 40 something thousand dollars worth of student loan debt. And that's exactly what I did. And I did it in less than 2 years. But it was funny because going into the break, I was basically like anything but corporate coming out of this, like anything but corporate. And then corporate was exactly what I went back to. But I went back as a different version of myself. And I had a way higher threshold of what I was like looking for and a much higher bar of what I was willing to accept. And so the job I came back to, given that it was corporate, was actually a dream job, a job I had truly dreamed of having 4 years before that didn't exist, that somehow came into the universe right at the moment I was coming out of my break and looking to apply for jobs, which was incredible. But it was for me, it was like, wow, that was a really big moment and also a really beautiful moment to realize sometimes the things that we're most afraid of going into a break aren't actually things to be afraid of at all because we change, we do the shifting, we do the growing, we have that alignment come back into our lives and then everything looks different. And so, going into it, the higher level thing was like, I need to get my life back on the right path because somewhere along the way, I have made a lot of sacrifices and exchanges that are not headed in the direction I want to go. I don't recognize the life I have. If I continue down this path, I will have wasted this one precious life. Like, this is it. Like, I'm in charge of this life and it is going off the rails and it looks great from the outside, but it feels like shit. And so I just can't, right? I just can't. And so that was what success would be. And I have to say, at that higher level, my break crushed it, right? Like I went back to corporate, but as a different version of me with a different intention. I'm here to pay off my debt. I have a goal. I'm so much more aware about what money is doing in my life and how I can use it to further my goals instead of just spending it to like keep up with the lifestyle that everybody around me has. And that was life changing, right? So I did achieve that version of success, but my big fear, right, actually came true. And it turns out it wasn't that bad after all.
I think you nail it with the intention. I think that's the difference, is coming back and having the intention rather than it just falling or us falling into it. Was the intention was to pay off your debt? Was the intention to then leave corporate once you'd pay off the debt?
Absolutely. I was buying my freedom is how I viewed it, right?
Yep.
So I came off this break, I've had this epiphany. I loved the copious amounts of freedom and autonomy.
But I need to pay off the 40,000 debt before I
Yes.
can get this.
Yes, before I can get it. And I had like this meltdown, like, how am I going to continue living this free? And I just realized like I need to pay off this debt. So once I realized how I was going to do that, go back to corporate, set a minimum salary requirement and just really work at saving and paying down my debt. That's what I did. But it was like it was such a journey to get there and to really accept that. But once I did, I was like, oh my gosh, this new intention is to buy my freedom back. That's what being debt free felt like to me, is that I can do anything in the world I want. And my business only has to make enough for me to live what I need today, right? To live and have my needs met for today, not for past decisions and like, for the next 30 years paying someone off, like my car was paid off, like all the things, right? And so for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to buy my freedom back as fast as I can. I paid off $42,000 worth of student loan debt in less than 2 years. And I even took a pay cut halfway through those 2 years because I changed jobs and wanted to go work for a smaller startup type company because I thought it would be more fun. And I had the freedom to do that as well. But I really viewed it as like, I'm buying my freedom back so I can go do my own thing.
And it was corporate in a way working for you rather than the other way. So it's mindset again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And any tips and tricks on how you managed to pay that off so quickly? So if we think about, I suppose, saving for a break, but also then on return coming back and buying your freedom, what sort of things did you do to do that pretty quickly?
Yeah, so it actually was easier than I thought because of the person I became saving for the break and then the person I continued to be while I was on a break. So the reason my break was 12 months and then became 20 months is because of the way that I spent money. I was just so well informed. I tracked, every dollar I spent and I just felt so empowered and I was making good choices and saving money just stopped feeling hard at some point because I just got really good at finding a way to afford the things that were important to me and be resourceful to find them within my budget, but then also letting go of all the other things that just weren't important. And so when I came back to corporate and I was ready to pay off my debt, a lot of it was the unconscious values alignment, right? It was like, finding an apartment that wasn't extravagant and it wasn't living at my means, but that like had the essentials, like knowing what the essentials for me were. And I mean, I was a little bougie. Like I was living in Minnesota, which is ridiculous cold tundra weather. And I was like, I know that this makes me miserable. So I will pay extra for a heated covered parking garage. And I will only look at apartments that have attached heated garages. And then I will pay more money to live there. Right. So it wasn't that I was like living in a hovel, like not, I was eating crackers or something. It was just that is so important to my well being. And I know that. So I'm going to spend a lot on that, but I'm going to have a really ugly ass kitchen as long as it works, right? Because I don't really value that. I like looking at it, but I don't value that the same way. And so I was able to make those trade-offs without really any struggle, any significant struggle, because I had just gotten so good at really being aligned and knowing what alignment was for me and where my values were, and also putting those lump sums towards, paying it down so I could pay it down as fast as possible.
Very, very smart. So let's think about the actual break. What did you do on the break? Talk us through the 20 months.
So, it was it was quite a journey. It was very unexpected how it started. So, I've talked about this before, but about a week before my break started. So 2 years of planning, 18 months of saving, working with a coach, all the things I had done in the past to arrive at this beautiful moment. And about a week before my break started, my younger brother, who was my favorite person, unexpectedly passed away. And facing that break, I had to figure out, what do I need this version of my break to be? So a lot of it stayed the same, some of it changed, but the first order of business remained. And that was, I decided to continue with the 3 to 4 month road trip through the US. My partner at the time decided to come with me, which I'm so grateful for him for doing that, because I think I probably was not in the mental shape to drive thousands of miles all by myself, like in that moment. But we had such an amazing time. I visited friends. We went to places he'd never seen in the US before. We went to places I had never seen. I saw the Grand Canyon. We saw Bryce Canyon. We drove up the coast in California all the way to Washington State. And, it was just a really amazing experience. I spent 2/3 of my trip staying with friends. So a third was in hotels and Airbnbs, and then 2/3 of it was with friends and family. So I got a lot of connection. And then after that, I ended up finishing that trip right around the holiday season. So I came home, which was my first holiday, without my brother, and came home to spend time with my family and did a holiday season here. And then it was time to really go abroad. Then I felt ready and I had time to plan. So I bought a one-way ticket from Washington, D.C. to Medellin, Colombia. I arrived in Medellin and it was incredible. And that's where the international stuff kicked off. I spent 6 months traveling abroad continuously. I did not see my partner for most of that. He did come visit me in Argentina, which was really fun. But outside of that, like especially when I was in Asia for 4 months, like we really didn't see each other. And then towards the end of my international travels, I decided to relocate. We decided to relocate and I moved to Denver. And I spent 3 or 4 months in Denver taking classes, just having fun, reorienting, kind of like processing my break and coming back with like processing reverse culture shock after being away for so long and just really like settling into this new place. And then I ended up, getting my job stuff together, like my resume, my cover letter. How am I going to talk about my break? How am I going to share it? Like, what kind of job do I want? Working with recruiters. And so I had time to do all of those things. So it was an adventure, but like I'd mentioned in the beginning, it definitely had stages where there were sort of different themes and different intentions for those parts of the break.
And what did you do to get the most out of each theme?
I think just knowing what it was about, and then you just have to go with the flow. I learned, and I really recommend for all of my clients as well, and for anyone listening who's just thinking about planning a break, do not overplan it. Please do not overplan it. high achievers, people that are used to like, having every day, every minute of their day planned out for them, or somebody else like your employer is telling you what to do, it's easy to think that plans are safe. Plans are how you know you're not going to air quotes waste time or get bored. And it's like, oh my goodness, you are going to change continually through this break experience. You are going to unlearn things, you are going to learn new things, you're going to rediscover who you are, you're going to discover your biorhythm unique to like you and not because of the employer or your 6 a.m. alarm clock. And it's just really important to not be overly prescriptive so that the version of you in month 2 that is starting to feel restored and isn't feeling burnt out can influence and impact month 5 and month 6, right? And continually down the line. And so, I planned a lot of my road trip because logistically it felt like I needed to, but I tried to create space in there and I did a pretty good job. But my boyfriend at the time and I still would have visits where we'd be like, oh my God, I wish we didn't. Because people would be like, okay, well, we'll see you for dinner. And we're like 6 hours away. And now our whole day is trying to get to this place to be there for dinner, right? And maybe we pass some cool place we want to stop. And so it was just a really interesting experience to see like, oh, I can trust myself to figure it out. And white space or empty space isn't empty. It's just unknown. And you can arrive to that moment and experience things that go beyond what your brain would have ever imagined possible. And so it really emphasized for me the importance of having a plan, but also not over planning the break.
And you mentioned that you then didn't see your partner for 6 months.
Yeah.
What, how did that work? And what was his thoughts on that?
Well, we would have to bring him on for his thoughts. I don't know what his actual thoughts were. I only know what he told me. But okay, first of all, I'll say context. He had lived abroad for probably like 5 or 6 years. He lived in Thailand for like 2 or 3 years. He lived in Mexico for a year. Like he traveled, he lived in Mauritania for a year. So he was very respectful and understanding of my desire to travel because he had lived that life. So I think that was very helpful for him to have more patience and understanding with what I was doing. We lived in Buenos Aires for a month together. I got an Airbnb, and through this like random amazing gift, one of my mom's friends had a ticket on JetBlue that she couldn't use, and it was a $700 credit. And she was like, "Do you guys want it? Because I can't use it and it's about to expire." So he used it to fly down to Argentina, and that was awesome. So we worked it out. So anyway, we spent a month together, and then I left, and then it was 6 months before I would see him again. And I would say for me, if I'm being super honest, I missed him, especially at certain points, because he was an awesome partner and an awesome traveler. And he's so good with directions and he speaks Spanish and he speaks Thai. So it was like so awesome to travel with him.
Sounds easy having him around.
I know it really was. It really was like it was, but almost too easy, but it was so easy. But I'm also on a journey that I've been planning for before I ever met him, right? So I met him while I was already saving for my break. And I told him from day one, like, listen, even if I really like you, I'm taking this break. What it looks like might change a little bit if you're in my life, but like I'm still taking this break. And it did sort of involve less international travel because I did want to spend, time with him as well. But all that said, you know, it got really hard around month 4. So for me, I'm getting like really immersed in what I'm doing. And I'm at a yoga teacher training in Bali. And I'm not like really talking to him at all because we barely have Wi-Fi and it's like exhausting and all the things. And I was just really present to all the adventures and all the stuff. But like, he's kind of like, okay, like I'm waiting for you. Like, when do you exactly come back? And I was in Southeast Asia for about 4 months and then I flew directly back to Denver. And I remember being in Thailand and I was like, I really want to see my partner. And I also don't want this break to be over. And I had a lot of tension about flying back. It wasn't him, but it was just like, I don't want this experience to end. And I think for me, all that time apart actually made it easier for me to be apart. Like, you almost forget how great it feels to be in union with your partner and to be able to do normal people things with them. And so it was like I almost had so much stimulation going on and so much adventure that it was like easier for me to stay in motion. Like that was my new, that was my new normal, my new default.
New normal.
And like thinking about coming back from that felt really hard. And he was like, you can't extend this anymore. Like, we have to talk about what this means because like I haven't seen you in 6 months and like this is really getting hard for me. And I was like, he's not wrong. And so I think like he's right. I'll go back. We'll figure this out, whatever. And then it was okay. Like it was a process to like re-enter and to reverse culture shock, but it was hard. And honestly, if I didn't have a partner, I might have just stayed in Southeast Asia for a lot longer or gone somewhere else afterwards. But at that point, it was like, okay, Katrina, like you have a partner. He's been very generous, like, and patient. If it were you in his shoes, like I probably would have flipped out after month 3 and been like, okay, what are we doing? So I just had to acknowledge that.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? The taking a break without your partner. I did it unintentionally, having only met my partner 6 months in, and but similar to yourself in the fact that he always knew. So he knew that
Yeah.
me and two friends had this 6 month trip planned, and it
Yeah.
was always going to happen. And so actually, they go into the relationship understanding that and knowing that. But yeah, it's an interesting one. How did the trip live up to expectation? You mentioned that your fear was corporate, but you came back to corporate. But actually, the trip and your time off, those 20 months, how did it live up to expectation?
I mean, I saw the world. What? I was in Vietnam. I was in Thailand. I was living in Argentina. I mean, living in Argentina for a month. It was incredible to me because part part of what I realized whenever this break became a real thing I was going to do is that my 1 day list was getting insanely long. One day I would like to go see Angkor Wat. One day I would like to go to Thailand. One day I would like to see Argentina. One day I would like to go hike, blah, 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 right? Like fill in the blank. That list just kept getting longer because the very short amount of PTO that I had every year was, like so and so's getting married, going home for the holidays, spending time with your family. Maybe you're going to be sick, like, trying to visit one friend, maybe if you're lucky for a long weekend. And it was like there just wasn't enough time. Like I was doing the math, former actuary, math major. I'm doing the math and I'm realizing this list is only getting longer. And so one of the biggest ways this break lived up and exceeded expectations is that I became a person who did what I said I wanted to do. And I got to live the adventure that like 8-year-old me, 12-year-old me, 15-year-old me, 20-year-old me, 25-year-old me had dreamed of. I wanted to visit Buenos Aires since I was like a first or second year in college and saw Evita with a friend, like the musical with Madonna. And I was just like, I don't know why, but this is now a place I have to go see. And I went there and I lived there for a month and I just showed up sight unseen to an Airbnb that I had rented for a month. And I showed up without my partner. Like he met me down there and I was just like, I'll figure it out. Right. I went to Provence. I read Peter Mail's A Year in Provence and every page I was like, I want to eat that. I want to see that. I want to eat that. I want to drink that. And it was so awesome that I was just in Avignon for like 10 days, eating and drinking all the things I wanted to eat and drink and seeing all the things I wanted to see. I was living my dream. And so that was that was incredible. I felt like at the beginning, especially, there was nowhere in the world that I couldn't go. It was just a matter of making choices, but every choice was available to me. There wasn't somewhere where I was like, well, I can't afford that, or I don't have enough time for that. It was like anything. The world is my oyster. My only struggle is that I have to prioritize because I don't have enough to see it all, but I can go anywhere. And that was incredible. And I think the other really incredible thing that really exceeded my expectations on my break is really reconnecting to myself and realizing that like I do control my life. I can make freaking miracles happen. And this break that at one time on paper seemed reckless and irresponsible and impossible. I mean, $1,500 in my bank account, $50,000 plus worth of student loan debt, a townhouse I was renting out that was underwater and not making a profit. I mean, there were just no reasons I should have thought that this was for me. And then I'm standing across the other side of the world living that dream. And it's like, I really can do anything. If I put my mind to it, I'm willing to put in some hard work. Like, I can do anything, anything. And I just feel like it opened up this reality for me that I don't have to live the way I was living, that I thought was the only way that smart, responsible, successful people lived, or else you died broke, homeless, like, dying of cancer on the street. Like, that was what my brain offered as my two options in life. And it just opened up a whole third dimension for me, or the sixth dimension of what was possible.
I love it. You've taken me to all those places with your descriptions. And so eating all of the food, drinking all of the cocktails, seeing all of the things, how did you maintain a sense of balance?
Mm.
I know through extended travel myself, it's sometimes tough to do that, and you definitely mention that in your book and lace it through your book. But how did you yourself maintain that sort of sense of balance?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a human, so I wouldn't say I
I
maintained it
didn't.
as much as I, yeah, so I would say I aimed for it, right? And sometimes I hit the mark and sometimes I didn't, but I didn't maintain it. And I think more than anything, I was just very aware when I was out of balance, and then I worked to move back into balance. So it was a constant ebb and flow of being in balance and then shifting out of balance and being like, oh, this, I'm tired now, and then like finding my balance again in a new way because everything is changing all the time. I definitely learned early on that slow travel is for me. I love slow travel mixed with a little bit of like fast day trip or overnight or weekend stuff, but I get tired really easily from like the grind of travel. And I love deep sinking deeper into a local experience and like, going to the cafe and wandering around a neighborhood that's more residential than it is touristy. And I just love feeling like I really got to know a place on a deeper level, not obviously as if I lived there, but at least deeper than like the flash in the pan tourist that's just passing through, for a couple days. So for me, there were times where, and I remember this very well when I was in Southeast Asia, but there were times where I would just decide to do a hostel, but I would be like, I'm going to get a bougie hostel because there were plenty there. They were some of the nicest hostels I've ever seen in my life. I'm sure they've only gotten nicer over time, but I'm going to get myself a really nice hostel. I'm going to splurge on like the nicest hostel. And my only job is to like eat and rest. And I would just, that was my whole thing, right? I remember finding one in Bangkok and like it was I think my third visit to Bangkok because I kept using it as a jumping off point.
Mm.
And I was really tired. And I was like, I'm just going to do 3 days here. And literally the only work I'm going to do is figuring out what to eat each day and where. And that was it, right? So for me, a lot of downtime was important and slower travel. When I was in Argentina, I got to know so many different nooks and crannies and neighborhoods, and I got to know my Airbnb host. And we went out for a birthday dinner with his girlfriend, him and his girlfriend, me and my partner. And we went to he took us to some fair that was like 2 hours outside the city. It was super cool. And I found that like that gave me more of like a regular life type of vibe going on. And I needed some of that intermixed with this fast paced, frenzied tourist stuff. And then I also think that, I didn't struggle with this as much as I see my clients struggle with, which is why I talk a lot about it in the book. But some people have a lot of guilt not working. I didn't struggle with that, but a lot of people do. And they also struggle with not feeling productive. I had a tiny bit of that, but not as much as I see most of my clients wrestle with. And so in the times where I wasn't traveling, right, it's about really finding ways to enjoy your day and give yourself permission to just focus on being and being present instead of doing. And I think when you're traveling, sometimes you're doing so much, it's easy to like ignore that or like not have to deal with what happens with like true rest. But when you're in a place and nothing is changing and it feels familiar, if you have a tendency to overwork, it will kick into high gear, especially if you're in a home, like a place you've been before. You'll be like, oh, I've got to paint this wall, or I'm supposed to do this, or gosh, there's all these things that I said I was going to do. And now I have the time, I should be doing them. And so I feel like that's another, challenge to face as well is like, how do I embrace the downtime?
Mm.
And how do I allow it? How do I be present and let that be enough and not feel guilty or beat myself up or replace my old job with a new job?
Somebody once said to me that we are human beings for a reason. We're not human doings. And it's so true,
Yeah.
isn't it? I
Mhm.
adopted probably about 3 or 4 years ago now. I have a to be list before my to do list. So every morning, as part of my morning routine, I have a to be list and it's what I want to be for the day. And it might be that I'm at home with my brother and my nieces. And so the top of my to be list is an auntie. I'm going to be present and I'm going to be an auntie today,
Yeah.
and what that means. But it's a really interesting point. And I think the balance piece, I have grappled with it time and time again around. So many people have said that I burn the candle at both ends and I
Mm.
am constantly changing and traveling. But I think for me, it's around having finally found my version of balance. And I think we've all got our own version of balance. And mine now is who's to say that it has to be a version of balance that is measured over a day or a week or a month. And so I think of it now like calories. If somebody talks to you about a diet, and it's, well, actually over a week eat this amount of calories. So I now look at balance as, actually over the year, have you maintained your version of balance? And I feel finally like I have. But yeah, absolutely, it's similar in that whole, it's finding your own version and what balance means to you, and then ebbing and flowing in and out of balance, and knowing, being aware, oh, actually, hang on a minute, I might be going too over the line on this way. And so pulling yourself back.
Yeah. And the secret, I mean, the secret to a life well lived when it comes to creating the right composition and the right kind of balance is also accepting that it can move in seasons. I think that is one of the hardest truths. As humans, we get fixed to whatever works now should work for me for forever. And we don't even realize we're doing it. But it's like, for a lot of people, what brought you balance, or what balance looked like, or what the happy composition looked like 2 years ago could be different than the season that you're in today. And I think that attachment to, like, I've got to recreate some version of the past for today, instead of just owning, this doesn't fit me anymore. I think I'm different. Let me be curious about how I'm different and find out what works for me today. Right. So it's like knowing what works, zooming out, and giving yourself permission to change. I think that's one of the ways we keep ourselves stuck, is that we're just really fixed and attached to something in the past because it worked or felt good in the past. And we're like, why doesn't it feel good now? I'm going to keep doing it until it feels good again.
And actually, no, we should change. This is the whole point. We should change. Is there one thing that you would look back and do differently, having now had 7 years coaching clients through breaks and sabbaticals, having written a book? What is there one thing that you go, oh, if it's that, I would have done that differently?
I love that question. And I think it sounds really cliche, and it makes me sad because I hate talking in ways that sound cliche, but I truly feel like even the mistakes I made brought me to where I am today. I think a lot of those mistakes are what taught me the things I needed to teach my clients. And, like, for example, I hated my yoga teacher training, hated it. Oh my God, it was awful. I wanted to learn yoga, but I didn't necessarily want to teach it. But the only way I knew how to really learn it the way I wanted to learn it was to do a teacher training. But I did it in a place that called itself a resort, and it was not really a resort. It was like very rural, like 3 hours north in Bali, like in the jungle, which is fine, but I'm not like a super nature girl. And so we had, like, for example, our rooms had these slat wooden boards, and there was huge spaces. So you could see like rodents crawling underneath of you, and like the insects would be in the bed with you at night. And I'm not that girl. I don't camp. And so I just like laid in terror. I was so tired. Every day was so mentally and physically exhausting. And then I would go to bed and I would just cry because I was like, I just want to feel safe in my bed so I can have my energy for tomorrow. And like that wasn't happening. And so, there are moments like that where I'm like, yeah, I wish I had put that $3,000 into something else. But then the question is like, what else? And even though I hated it, there was something about it for me because that was the singular only experience. That was a singular experience I had on my break that was not a joyful experience. That was it. Everything else I did, if it wasn't bringing me joy, I let go of it. That was like the one thing I finished that felt like I did not like that, and I will not do that again. But I also feel like it shaped a lot of my break and taught me things that I don't know if I would want to go without those things. And I also honestly feel like at the end of the day, my break opened up a portal into things like helping other people take breaks, becoming an entrepreneur, writing a book with a major publisher, being featured in Forbes, being on TV. Like, my break, as messy, well, yeah, it was kind of messy, but like as messy and possibly imperfect as it was, it opened the door to that. And more importantly than all of those things, I survived the single most worst moment of my life. Like, losing my brother was the worst moment, and I survived it. And I came out of it feeling like there was still a reason to live, and I can still be excited about life sometimes, and make the most of that. And so for me, it's like, wow, I don't think I could change anything. If I were to change, if you like twisted my hand and made me do it, or twisted my arm, I would say I wish that I could have been even more intentional with my money. I was very intentional, but I would have just loved to have been on a break longer. Although I say that, and then I wouldn't have landed the dream job because they were looking for someone the same, like I think 2 weeks before I decided to end my break. So it's like, I feel like in some ways I can't undo any part of it or improve on any part of it.
The arm can't be twisted at all.
Yeah, because it's just, because it literally like created the most magical next chapter of my life.
Absolutely. And what a way to end our discussion. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Katrina, how I like to end the podcast is asking you what your only top 3 tips would be. I know you'll have heaps and heaps, and if anybody wants all of your tips, they can buy Taking a Career Break for Dummies. But what would your top 3 tips be for anybody listening who is either thinking about taking a career break or is about to embark on a sabbatical or a career break?
Number 1, develop a purpose statement, know your why, set that intention, predefine what success is so that you know, A, what's at stake if you don't take a break, why you're trying to do it, give yourself the words and vocabulary to articulate, like, I want to take a break because, right? But really think about that succinct sort of clarity statement for you that solidifies what this is about, what this could be, and knowing what success would look like. I talk a lot about that in the book, and there's also like some prompts you can answer that'll help you figure that out. But either way, like, get your statement together. Number 2 is, if you're feeling like you want to take a break, but you can't quite seem to make it happen, I encourage you to think about what's at risk if you don't go. I was on a client call just yesterday, and I've been working with this client. She hired me. She's needing a break. She's going to take a break, but oh my goodness, like, her brain keeps sending her back into analysis paralysis, and it wants to keep remaking the decision about whether or not should I take a break or not. And yesterday I finally was like, let's break it down and see what's at risk if you do take a break, and then what's at risk if you don't. And when we got really clear on the true, actual, realistic worst case scenarios for both of those situations, they were almost mirrors, right? Like, a bad thing could happen with my finances here. A bad thing could happen with my finances here. A bad thing could happen with my career here. A bad thing could happen with my health. Like, it's just like, there's so much at risk if you don't go, if you need and want a break, but we're not always making our brain think about that. Our brain is just thinking about, what do I stand to lose if I do this? But what do you stand to gain, and what's at risk? So I encourage you to do that, right? Like, write it out like she did. She was like, wow, there's so much at risk. And it honestly isn't even worse than what happens if I stay and burn out and go into adrenal fatigue and develop an autoimmune, disorder, because I am beyond stressed. And the last thing I'll say is, there's a lot of charged energy around the cost of a break for many people. I get it. Number 1, please remember, when it comes to money, you can have your own version of a break. 2/3 of my clients travel internationally during their break. A third don't. A third stay at home, or a third move in with a family member, or a third move in with a friend. Like, you don't have to go big and extravagant and spend tens of thousands of dollars if you need a different kind of break. So please remember, you get to design it to be as short or as long as you can afford. You get to design it to have travel or not, to be what you need it to be. And also, I urge you to think about what affording a break really is. It's not an expense. It's an investment. It's an investment in your happiness. It's an investment in your well-being. We spend tens of thousands of dollars on cars, education, houses, renovating houses, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Do we argue, and do we dedicate tens of thousands of dollars to pouring into ourselves, to living our lives to the biggest and fullest extent, to going after those green flags, to making the most of our time on this earth? So think about your break as an investment when it comes to the money piece, and really try to put a cost number around it. Try to know, what would it cost to take a break? That is a helpful piece of information to know how far you are from the goal, or if you already are at the goal and you just need to work on giving yourself permission. But I have a lot of people think it seems too far away, but they can't give me a number. And when they get a number, it's like, oh, now I see how I could actually make that happen.
Amazing. Thank you. 3 great top tips from the queen of taking career breaks and sabbaticals. Thank you so much once again, Katrina. It's been wonderful. And I would love to have you back at some point where we can talk further about your book. But for now, thanks heaps, and have a great day.
Thanks, Bex. You too. And I just want to say, I love what you're doing, and I love the show, and I love that you're putting this out there for people to get inspired.
Thank you. Take care.
Appreciate your situation.
Well, thank you so much for listening to our first episode of Sabbatical Stories. I really do appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to join us. A massive thanks to Katrina for kicking us off and sharing her mesmerising story, one that had me crying and laughing all at the same time. Her book, Taking a Career Break for Dummies, is an essential tool for anyone thinking about or ready to embark on a career break or sabbatical. It's a real tactical and logical resource to help you really develop a plan for taking a break. It looks at setting a budget, creating your timeline, getting the best out of your break, and also transitioning back when you're ready. There are some great activities and some real life examples that will really help you make your dream a reality. Thank you to Auntie B at the Flaxen, my amazing, incredible, patient producer. I also want to give a special shout out to the incredibly talented Joanna Cook, whose soulful blend of smooth vocals we're really lucky enough to use throughout the show. And if you're interested in sharing your story on Sabbatical Stories, please do get in touch. DM me on Instagram at sabbatical_stories or Rebecca Thomas on LinkedIn, and both of the links will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like and rate the show. It would mean a lot to me. But also, if you think a friend will like the episode, then please do buzz it over to them. After all, sharing is caring. Until the next time, take care and dream big.
Taking matters into your own hands, you won't believe that you're making